There are a bunch of mistakes that you make every single day simply because of the way in which your brain works. Today in the Change Your Minds podcast, I'm going to walk through the most important psychological mechanisms that are at play in guiding why we make the mistakes that we do. We'll be talking about things like confirmation bias, fundamental attribution error, cognitive dissonance, loss aversion, and many, many more of the most popular and most important insights and ideas in psychology over the last 100 years. I'm going to walk you through these biases, how they impact us, why they cause us to make the mistake that they do, and more importantly, how we can start to leverage this knowledge to be able to transform the way in which we think. This is going to be one of the most useful episodes you will ever come across. If you're into psychology, there's nowhere better to be. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Changing Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we're going to talk about cognitive processing. Now, I know what you're saying. You're thinking to yourself, cognitive processing, really? That doesn't sound like fun. I'm telling you, it is a lot of fun, because we're going to be looking at psychological concepts that you might have heard before, and you might have thought to yourself, I think I know what that means, but I'm not 100% sure. Or I do know what that means. If only someone was to do a podcast where they were to walk through examples of it so that I can then communicate about it even more impressively than I already do. Well, you're in the right place. If you've no interest in psychology and you're here for some other reason, then I don't know what to tell you, but I hope that you find what you're looking for. Anyway, today we're going to talk about some of the biases that cause us to make some of the mistakes that we do. And we're going to explore some of the most popular terms that have been used over the past few years to describe some of the ways in which our minds think and why we think the way we do. We're going to start off and we're going to look at cognitive dissonance first of all. And cognitive dissonance is something that I'm sure you may well have heard of if you've any interest in psychology. This is a term that you would have heard of quite a bit. And it's basically the mental discomfort that we experience as a result of simultaneously holding two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values. Sometimes it's also the tension that exists whenever your behavior is out of alignment with your identity. So you see yourself as this type of person, but your behavior is saying something different. This whole notion of how we change habits as a result of changing our identity. What James Clear talks about in his great book, Atomic Habits, that one of the things that you do is every behavior you engage in is a vote for the kind of person you want to become. And if you want to shift your behavior, change your identity is a great way to do that, and vice versa. That, in a nutshell, is explained by this notion of cognitive dissonance. This is something that was originated by the wonderful Leon Festinger in the 1950s. He also, as we've talked about in a previous episode, was discussing concepts like social comparison theory as well. But cognitive dissonance explains why people strive for internal consistency, why they want to be able to make it so that their beliefs are in alignment with each other and their beliefs are aligned with their behavior. And this is really important for us to know because it'll often explain why we may well sabotage ourselves, why we screw ourselves up, why we don't always make the best decisions possible. So some examples here would be we might not enjoy smoking but still find ourselves doing it, or we might struggle with the ability to quit it because we see that we are indeed just a smoker, and as a result of that, the label or identity that we believe about ourselves will cause us to prevent the opportunity we might have had to be able to make the changes that we need. Or we might experience tension because we're not exercising, even though we talk about how valuable fitness is, and then either we stop talking about it or we eventually will exercise. So sometimes cognitive dissonance can be the very reason why we actually start to engage in the behavior we want. But more often than not, it can also be the opposite. It can prevent us from doing what it is that we want to do. We might feel uneasy about criticizing a friend while trying to be supportive as well, and be caught in a situation where on the one hand, you don't want to support your friend's behavior, but on the other hand, you want to be a good friend. And that creates a sort of a conflict or a state of tension that can only be resolved once you make a decision. What are you going to do? Or we might experience conflict from wanting independence, but also wanting closeness. This whole chestnut whereby on the one hand, we want our freedom, but on the other hand, we want to be able to be in a relationship. Sometimes this happens in lots of different situations where we're struggling with two opposing needs. So for example, Tony Robbins talks about what he calls the 6 needs. And in those 6 needs, one of them is certainty and the other is variety, which are obviously opposites. So on the one hand, we want certainty. We want to know what's next. On the other hand, we like variety, something that's a bit different. On the one hand, once again, he also talks about the need for a desire for connection. On the other hand, he also talks about the desire for being what he calls significant. So we have significance against connection. That's a sort of a tension between the two. And we've certainty versus variety, again, tension between the two. And that's pretty much our brains. Our brains have lots of these tensions happening. And whenever we have beliefs that are oppositional or beliefs that are conflicting, that tends to lead to a state of cognitive dissonance. Once again, this also leads us then to make the changes that we need to so that we resolve this tension. And this is often what happens whenever we successfully change behavior, whether that's in a good direction or in a bad direction. Another example might be, we might say on the one hand, I value work-life balance, but we might find ourselves work addicted or feeling conflicted about unethical business practices to achieve success, and we rationalize it because we don't want to admit to ourselves that we're engaging in that kind of behavior because that's against what we believe. Or we might feel regret after making a purchase that contradicts our desire to save money because on the one hand we're supposed to save, but on the other hand we made an impulse buy, etc., etc. The real reason for us to be able to understand cognitive dissonance is, first of all, to recognize when it's happening to us and therefore to work out what is it, the belief that is most important for you, what do you choose to believe. But also it's recognizing it happens in others as well. And also, how can we leverage cognitive dissonance to make it more likely that we engage in the kind of new behaviors that allow us to get the results that we want? That's how we start to use this concept. So cognitive dissonance is obviously popular, but so is the next bias. This is something I've probably said or mentioned more than any other bias, and that is confirmation bias. This is our tendency to search for and interpret and remember information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. So we look for evidence to prove that we're absolutely correct. And we dismiss evidence that contradicts us. Sometimes this is also known as disconfirmation bias. We look for ways to contradict whatever messages we're getting in when they disagree with our point of view or our perspective. So this has been widely studied in cognitive psychology. There's tons of examples there. Warren Buffett talked about confirmation bias as being one of the single biggest reasons why people lose money in investments. Now, he didn't necessarily use the term confirmation bias, but he did talk about how we get an idea of a particular investment we want to make, and then we look for evidence to prove that we're right and dismiss evidence that contradicts us. But in business, it's the equivalent of searching for data that supports a business strategy while ignoring data that suggests it might fail, or hiring candidates based on information that confirms your initial positive or negative impressions. You think to yourself, oh yeah, see, I knew it, I was right. Other examples might be in relationships. You focus on the other person's behavior and confirm your belief that they're trustworthy where you ignore all the red flags. Anyone ever done that? Have you ever seen a red flag and you're like, I don't think that's a red flag. I think it's just contextual because of this and this and this. But genuinely, once you get to know them, when you have to say once you get to know them, they're actually a really good person, that's a red flag. Sorry to tell you. Sometimes people, no, once you get to know them, the serial killer, yeah, I know he was a serial killer. I know he killed lots of people. But actually, once you get to know him and you take all the killing out of the way, he's actually a real sweetheart, right? He's got a really good, sensitive heart. And he's got more than a heart because he eats hearts. And who wouldn't? Most people wouldn't. So please get out of that relationship with the serial killer. It's just not going to go anywhere. Except, to your death, probably. Another example would be reading reviews that supports your decision to buy a product while disregarding negative feedback. You just head in the sand technique, as we call it. Or in health, you seek out articles that confirm your beliefs about a particular diet while ignoring studies to disprove it. Oh, I read a study online that shows that if I eat ice cream and M&Ms all day long, it actually helps me decrease stress and therefore helps me live longer. Now, I don't know where you're going to find a study that says that. I'm pretty sure you're going to be stretching a lot to find one of those. But if you do, then all you'll do is go benefits of M&Ms. You'll type that into Google. You'll ask every AI system you can. Here, ChatGPT, tell me what are any of the potential good nutritional benefits I can get from M&Ms and ice cream. And then ChatGPT, good old ChatGPT, if it doesn't have an answer, it'll probably, hallucinate one like it does and tell you what you want to hear. Again, this is when we want to listen to what we want to hear and we ignore anything that contradicts it. So if by any danger it gives you any information you don't want that says, oh, M&Ms are full of sugar. No, I don't want to hear that. Don't tell me about the sugar there. Or in health, you might interpret symptoms in a way that fits a self-diagnosed condition. So you already convince yourself that you've got minutes to live and you go, oh, there we go. I've got a scratch on an itchy knee, and I found evidence that says that itchy knees sometimes mean that you've got seconds to live. By the way, just to let you know, disclaimer, if you do have an itchy knee, it's nothing to do with 6 minutes to live or whatever. You probably have a lot longer, maybe an hour. I'm joking, I don't know. I'm not a medic. You don't come to this channel for medical advice, do you? If you do, God bless you. You really are in a bad place. The next one is what we call the Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is named after David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who first described the effect in 1999. There has been a little bit of controversy over it, blah, 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 blah. But it basically, in a nutshell, we all like it because it explains how people's lack of knowledge and skills leads to overconfidence. In other words, the smarter you think you are, oftentimes the dumber you are. And generally speaking, a lot of people who think that they're not that smart, more often than not, you're smarter than you actually think that you are, which is probably not hard if you think that you're dumb. Anyway, this is the tendency, the bias, where people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability, while those with a high ability underestimate their competence. So some examples of this would be in health. You might overestimate your ability to follow a complex diet plan without proper understanding. So you go, oh yeah. So if you've ever heard a person go, yeah, what that means is, number one, they're annoying, because anyone who says, yeah, like that is annoying. But number two, it also suggests that they're engaged in Dunning-Kruger effect. And the Dunning-Kruger effect manifests in this way. Also, you might believe that you can effectively self-treat medical conditions without adequate knowledge. Raise your hands up if you know somebody that does this all the time, right? Raise your hands up if you know somebody that acts as if they are a medical genius. They give you all the vitamins to take. They tell you the minerals. You know what you need to do? You need to eat more of this. You know what you need to do? You need to do this stretch. You know what you need to do? And you don't need to do any of it. I mean, maybe you do, but more than likely you don't. But lots of folks out there like that. From a business point of view, these are people that might overestimate their entrepreneurial skills, despite lack of experience or knowledge, think that they know a lot more than they actually do, or believe that they're an expert in the field after minimal exposure. You know what I saw recently? There was this guy who wrote down and put it, I think it was on LinkedIn. This is dreadful. I feel pain thinking of this, but I'm just going to share it with you so you can feel the pain too. This guy writes on LinkedIn, he goes, I believe we can learn everything from YouTube. In fact, I would be quite confident that I would be able to do heart surgery if I watched heart surgery done enough times on YouTube. Now, here's the thing. If you agree with him, please just don't ever watch another video of mine again. The knowledge that someone exists out there and you're watching a video like this makes me too depressed. So I beg of you, please go somewhere else. Right? But number two, like watching heart surgery, let me tell you, if I met a heart surgeon, I'm like, what's wrong? I have to do this. And I go, okay, just so we're clear, what's your experience? They say, I've watched the same video 150 times. Have you been in medical school? Have you ever done any form of surgery before? No. So what's your experience? 150 times. Watched it 150 times. You are never, ever getting anywhere remotely close to my heart, right? And I mean that metaphorically as well as literally, right? So that's an example of Dunning-Kruger at its height. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's an insane example, but the more I go online, the less I think it's insane, and the more I see it is way more common than it should be. And then one other example, we overestimate our ability to evaluate tech products after reading a few articles. We think we're a genius after reading just a couple of things. And this is something, again, you can see plenty of evidence of over time, the Dunning-Kruger effect, the fun one. Another effect that is quite important is what we call the framing effect, and this is the tendency for people to make different decisions depending on how the information is presented or framed to them. So a great example of this would be, we'll go to a medical one, a surgery. So people were given the option in an imaginary scenario, and this included doctors were given this option as well. And the scenario that they were given was that this particular operation has a 90% survival rate. And they asked how many people would actually go ahead with the surgery or operation, right? Because they had a certain limited time that they were alive if they didn't have the operation, right? So 90% survival rate. How many people said yes? And then they took similar group and they said 10% mortality rate. How many people? And they found significantly more people chose the 90% survival as opposed to choosing the 10% mortality, even though 90% survival is 10% mortality. But when it was framed as 90% survival, more people elect for the treatment, which is absolutely insane, right? Also, people will opt for a diet plan described as 90% effective more than they will look at 10% failure whenever we frame it in terms of success versus failure. In relationships, we'll perceive a partner's behavior differently based upon whether it's framed positively or negatively, and will react to feedback differently depending on whether it's framed as constructive or a complaint. In business, we'll make investment decisions based on positive framing of potential returns more than an objective analysis. So once again, the way in which it's communicated to us, the language that is used when it's described to us will often influence the decision that we make. And we'll often choose products based upon positive framing in ads such as 80% lean, more likely than we are to go 20% fat. So we see 80% lean and 20% fat, even though it's the same thing. We are more likely to choose the 80% lean. We're also more likely to buy a product with a money-back guarantee framed positively rather than the same guarantee framed as a refund. So instead of saying, money-back guarantee, instead you say, we'll give you a refund if you're not happy. It's actually better to talk about it as a guarantee. Once again, framing matters. So the framing effect is a very, very important effect to consider. We then have what we call the sunk cost fallacy. This is the tendency we have to keep investing in a decision. This could be with time, energy, or money based upon previously invested resources rather than current and future costs and benefits. In other words, if you're doing something and it isn't working yet, but you put a lot of energy and a lot of time into it, you might keep flogging, as we call it, flogging a dead horse. You might keep trying to, it's pretty cruel on the horses. Apologies for anyone who loves horses. It's just a metaphor. Don't actually mean it literally, but obviously it came from a literal example. But anyone who flogs a live horse, in my book, is not someone I would invite around to dinner. So just want to be clear about where I stand on that. But the reality is there's examples of this. For example, you might stay in a relationship that's unfilling just because, well, we've already been together 10 years, put a lot of effort into this relationship, even though every day might be a nightmare for you. Or you might use a service or a product that doesn't meet your needs because you've already paid for it. We've paid for it, so we better use it. But you got no use for it. Well, find a use for it. We've already paid and there was no guarantee. They didn't give us a refund. See the callback there? Then there's health. You continue a diet or exercise program even though you're not losing any weight. You're going, I hate eating kale in the morning at 6 a.m. and this protein sandwich. And I hate to do CrossFit followed by running 20 miles. This is agonizing and it's not working for you. You're not losing any weight. By the way, if you are running 20 miles and you are doing CrossFit and you are eating kale and you're not losing weight, check that out, mate. Check that out. Something's wrong. Something's definitely wrong. And again, I'm not a dietitian, not a nutrition, I'm not a fitness expert, but something's wrong. Trust me. Don't trust me. I know nothing about medicine. But another example would be persistent with a medication that has side effects because you've already bought a lot of it, right? So you go, okay, well, all hands are on deck. I've already paid the money, so therefore let's just keep using this, no matter what. And so these are some examples of sunk cost bias. Another bias that's quite popular in the everyday world we live in is what we call loss aversion. This is the tendency we have to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains. This is made popular by Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, again, the two sort of godfathers of behavioral economics, which is the psychology of decision making. And this loss aversion highlights how we overvalue loss. So the pain of loss is worse than the pleasure of gain. And so if, let's say, me and you, we have a game where we toss a coin and I say, if you win, you get $5. If I win, I get $5. Most people won't take that bet. But most people will only take the bet when they stand to gain $8 in exchange for the risk of losing $5. So in other words, you won't take the bet until you stand to me giving you $8 if you win and risk losing $5 if I win. And so again, it shows that we tend to overvalue the losses quite significantly more than we do value the actual gains that we get. And so some examples of this from a health point of view, it might mean that we stick to a familiar diet or exercise routine to avoid the potential loss of control or loss of comfort. Like we don't want to go inside of our comfort zone, or we avoid a new treatment with potential side effects just because we're worried about the negative, even though there's benefits there. Or we stay in a comfortable relationship to avoid the loss associated with breaking up. So we don't want the feeling of, we don't want to lose out. And as a result, you keep engaging in that relationship. Or in business, you might hesitate to invest in new opportunities to avoid potential financial losses. Is where we're way too worried about not taking risks. We're way too conservative, and as a result, we shoot ourselves in the foot, or we don't even go near shooting ourselves in the foot because we're too scared of using guns. That's a terrible example. Anyway, avoiding new products or brands to prevent the potential loss of satisfaction. Again, this is when we're too safe and we avoid doing any sort of things that are adventurous because we don't want to take any form of risks, which is not so great. The next bias is the representative heuristic, and this is our tendency to judge the probability of an event by how much it resembles what we consider to be a typical example of the event. This was again popularized and introduced by Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and it looks at how we rely on stereotypes and past experiences to make judgments. So some examples here is we might judge a person's potential partner compatibility based upon superficial traits that resemble past partners. So, I go for brunettes, therefore whatever. So we tend to think to ourselves, well, we're compatible because I tend to work well with brunettes, or I tend to work well with people who have this particular quality, that particular quality. Or assuming someone's relationship advice is good because they fit the stereotype of a successful partner. Oh, they'd be a good partner. I must listen to everything that they have to say. Don't. Hiring someone because they fit the profile of a successful employee based upon appearance and background. Oh, look at the way their suit fits them. The way their suit fits them probably won't help in terms of give you an idea as to whether or not they would be great at the job. Maybe it'll influence it. If, for example, they're selling suits, maybe that's relevant. But if they're doing almost any other potential job, not so much. Then investing in a business because it resembles other successful ventures, ignoring specific details. Once again, that's obviously not going to work out too well. And believing a product will be high quality because its packaging resembles other high-end packaging. Just because it's packaged nice doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same. Or if it resembles in some way other successful brands you've used before, again, doesn't mean that it's going to work out the same. Or finally, some health examples. If we believe a treatment will work because it worked with someone else with similar symptoms, that doesn't guarantee that it'll work with you as well. And if we just look at someone and we think, oh, they're fit, and we assume they're healthy as well, just because they're fit doesn't automatically make them healthy also. They could be fit, but also have lots of health issues as well. So those are kind of examples of where the representative heuristic needs to be something we go, hang on a second. Am I jumping to conclusions here? You don't want to. Then we have another really interesting one called the fundamental attribution error. And this was again identified by the psychologist Lee Ross. It explains how people often attribute others' actions to their personality while neglecting external factors. So it's the tendency to overemphasize our personal characteristics and ignore situational factors when judging other people's behavior. So this is a case where for example, in health, we might blame someone for their health issues, assuming it's down to their lifestyle choices. Someone's sick or someone's got bad health issues. Well, of course they do. They don't take care of themselves. However, if it turns to us, we're not going to do that, right? We'll tend to go, oh, it's so unfair. Life is so hard. I've been so unlucky. So we're more likely when it comes to us to go, the reason for my problems is the situation. Whereas when it comes to other people, the reason for their problems is their choices. Judging a person's weight gain as a lack of discipline, right? If you're overweight, you're more likely to say, oh, it's so unfair, metabolism is not right, blah, blah, blah. Whereas when someone else is overweight, we're more likely to think, oh, they obviously aren't disciplined and whatnot. Now, you might not say that out loud because it's kind of a mean thing to say, but you might say it to yourself, mightn't you? I'm not saying you would. I think you probably definitely wouldn't, but other people, they would do. See, we're even doing a sort of meta fundamental attribution error there. It's not really, but you know. Next, relationship. You might assume a person's bad mood is down to their personality, not down to external stressors. And when I say external stresses, I'm probably meaning you. So, it's like your partner's like really annoyed and angry and you're like, God, they're so moody. Maybe you pissed them off. Maybe the reason they're moody is because of you. Maybe you're the mood creator. Maybe they were absolutely happy until they met you. Maybe their lives were amazing and then they fell in love with you and now they're moody. Probably not, but just in case, you want to be wary of it, right? Imagine all of our partners they would have been so much happier without us. And that's something nice to contemplate. I'm sure it's not true. It's definitely not true for you. Another example in business would be attributing an employee's poor performance to laziness and not considering external distractions or lack of resources. Oh my goodness, they're so late. Well, maybe the reason they're struggling is because of the circumstance, the situation. Or maybe the reason we think that our colleague's behavior is rude is not necessarily because they're rude. Maybe they're under a lot of stress. They just reacted. We need to start to pay attention to these issues because oftentimes by just assuming that because a person is this way or has this behavior, it automatically means that it's coming from them and it's their own fault. That is an erroneous conclusion for us to get to. Just like it is when we do the opposite to ourselves and say the reason I'm not getting the results is because of the situation, it's because of my lack of luck, it's because of a whole host of other things that we say. Now, the next bias is called the curse of knowledge. This is our tendency to assume that others have the same background knowledge as oneself. This is really when we are trying to put ourselves in other people's shoes, we overcredit them with having all the information we have inside our head. It's hard for us to see the wood from the trees. It's hard for us to have what we call a beginner's mind. And this is like when we try to explain, let's say doctors explain complex medical terms to a patient without considering the fact the patient might not know, have a clue what they're talking about. Right? I've been in some meetings with like investment financial advisors and they bombard me with all this technical language and I've no clue and I have to like sift through the complexity and say, excuse me, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And not everyone's going to want to look like a dummy. So therefore, when they do use complexity, we might not, check in with them. So they might speak, it goes over our head, but we don't want to say it. And so it's imperative for us to stop and think to ourselves, what is the level of knowledge this person has? And how can I be aware of that? And how can I consider that so that I'm communicating with them at the level that they're at? We also have relationship examples whereby you might expect a partner to understand certain references to past events without presenting any form of context. Sometimes you might even have a partner that will start having a conversation mid-conversation because they've had the rest of it in their head, which is a fun one. So like they're just going, I just don't understand why. And it comes out of the blue and they expect you to be like, yeah, I don't understand why either. I don't understand what you're talking about. So maybe you can give me context. Because sometimes we just assume it. We just don't even think about it. Or from a purchasing perspective, we might expect other people to appreciate the technical specifications of a product without explaining them. So I've gone into some computer stores, or Apple stores where they go, oh, it's got this gigawatt, high pixelized, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like going, really? Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah, I've always wanted a pixel watt. Pixel watts are my favorite, right? You know what I hear then? I hear 1.21 gigawatts. 1.21 gigawatts. What the hell is a gigawatt? Where's that from? Back to the Future. 1.21 gigawatts. That's a lot of energy. That's enough. That's like the same amount as a bolt of lightning, which, by the way, is just enough of nuclear energy that would get you to engage the flux capacitor, which makes time travel possible. So there you go. Not everyone knows what a gigawatt is, so chill is all I'm saying. So that's the curse of knowledge. The next bias is called the Hawthorne Effect. This is the alteration of behavior by study participants due to their awareness of being observed. This was based upon studies done in the 20s and 30s in Hawthorne Works Factory, where they demonstrate how people change their behavior when they have a feeling that they're being observed. Really fascinating study that was done on this, I think, a few years ago, whereby there was a place set up like a museum or like an art gallery, and there was a $20 bill, and it was placed in front of this painting. And there was two conditions. One condition was the painting had the eyes of the person in the painting was looking away, and the other one, the eyes were looking directly at whoever was looking at the painting. And in the situation where the eyes were looking directly at whoever was looking at the painting, people were far less likely to pick up the $20 or whatever it was and pocket it. And they were much more likely to actually either ignore it or bring it to the lost and found and tell people about it. So really interesting. Even when it's not a real human, even when it's a painting, we're still more likely to be hoodwinked by that, which is very interesting. So just be careful. Whenever you're walking past a painting, if there's eyes and they're looking at you, you might feel like you're being looked at. So there you go. It also explains a concept called Zoom fatigue. Whenever we're on Zoom, it can be stressful if we're on there for a long period of time. And a big part of the stress comes because we're aware that we're being watched by people. And this almost it influences in the back of our mind. Some examples of this in the real world might be in health, patients improving their health habits because they know their progress is being monitored. so they're extra careful in what they do. Or in a fitness study, they might exercise more diligently because they're being watched. Or a relationship, we might improve behavior towards a partner when we're being observed by a therapist. In business, employees increase productivity when they know that management's observing them. And in terms of purchasing, shoppers tend to be more selective with purchases when they know that they're part of a study. So they want to, again, impress. We want to signal to the world something about us, which is quite important. The next effect is the hard, easy effect. And this is the tendency we have to be overconfident in our ability to perform hard tasks and underconfident in our ability to perform easy tasks. And this is very interesting phenomenon. So some examples of this would be we might overestimate our ability to stick to a challenging fitness routine or regime. At the same time, we might underestimate our ability to maintain simple, healthy habits like daily hydration, right? Drinking water regularly. Might think to ourselves, I don't know if I can drink water regularly. Look, drinking water is easy. See? Do you think you could do that? Of course you could. Could you do that regularly? Of course you could. But oftentimes we think to ourselves, oh, I'll never be able to do it, this and that and the other. And instead we get offered this other fancy Dan technique where we got to go on this special diet or we got to go and do all these fancy exercises and you go, oh, that's for me, right? So that's another example of this hard, easy effect. In terms of relationships, we might underestimate our ability to perform easy relationship tasks like showing appreciation regularly, right? That might be something, oh, I'm not sure that'll work out well. Whereas you think to yourself, I'd really like to get stuck into some of the complex, challenges that we have, and we might think that we're able to solve them easier. Or in business, once again, we might be more confident about our ability to handle complex business challenges, difficult business tasks, but we might be underconfident in handling routine tasks or doing simple things on a regular basis. And then finally, we have naive realism. Naive realism is the belief that we see the world exactly as it is, and the people who disagree with us, they're the ones that are uninformed, irrational, or biased. Now, if you tell me that there is a particular bias that tends to infect the world at large, and so many people have it, this is it, naive realism. This has been studied extensively, and there's loads of examples, especially in politics. I'm seeing the world as it is. They are seeing a distorted, warped version of the world. And sometimes you have intellectuals, sometimes you have people who are, let's say, particularly smart, and they classify themselves as independent thinkers, and they have a very sort of definite view of the world. This is the way the world works. And anybody who disagrees with them, they just immediately count as I can't believe they're so stupid. We've heard politicians use the term as well when they say, oh, there's this group of people who are the deplorables, or this group of people who are this type of person. And the problem is that as soon as we fall into this trap, we make the same error and we fall into the trap of naive realism. Some examples of this would be in relationships. You might believe that your perspective of relations dynamics is objectively right, whereas your partner's isn't. Or you assume that friends who disagree with you on these issues are biased or irrational. From a health perspective, we might believe that our certain diet is the right diet, we're on the right one and everyone else is wrong. Or we might assume that other people have different exercise regimes than us. Oh my God, you're running. Running is so bad for you. What I do is I do CrossFit, that's good for me. Or I lift weights, that's good for me. Or I cycle and that's good for me, but running is terrible. Those kind of assumptions we might have in business. You might believe that your business strategies are the best and dismiss any alternates or alternatives to that. Or you might assume that colleagues who disagree with your ideas, oh, they're so stupid. I can't believe there's people that are that stupid that work in the business world. It's crazy. How did they get their job? How can they even tie their shoelaces with opinions like that? Very condescending, but also great examples of naive realism. So there you have it. We covered a lot of really cool stuff. I hope you'll agree. Naive realism is one. We talked about the hard, easy effect, the Hawthorne effect, the curse of knowledge. We looked at the fundamental attribution error, representativeness, heuristics. We talked about loss aversion. We talked about the sunk cost fallacy. We looked at the framing effect, the Dunning-Kruger effect, confirmation bias, and finally, cognitive dissonance. And I hope that you're not in a state of cognitive dissonance when you think about the Change Your Minds podcast. I hope you're in a state of, oh my goodness, I thought it was amazing, and I think it's brilliant, and there's no dissonance there. I'm going to subscribe. I'm going to rate. I'm going to review. I'm going to leave a lovely comment. I'm going to say really nice things, and I'm going to watch every episode I can get my hands on. And if I can't get my hands on it, then I'm just going to watch it on the computer. And I'm going to tell lots of people and spread the word. I'm going to sign up for Owen's newsletter, owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter. Or I'm going to watch all the rest of the episodes and then tell everybody I know that they should watch it too. So if that is on your mind, wonderful. Delighted to hear it. But for now, thanks very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting. And I hope that if you're a psychology nerd like me, you've found some really good insights and ideas here. And I hope that you take care of yourself. Be well. As always, may the force continue to be with you. And I will see you soon. Bye for now.